this was, you know, a little bit weird to be writing for him because we'd never met Troy. We'd worked on his case for so long, but we'd never met him. But ultimately that's what Troy became within a minute of walking into that room. And that's what Troy became to everyone. You know, I might have met him, but he was everybody's friend. Everybody that took action for him. You know, he was your friend, he's my friend, he's our friend. So we walked into the prison, the Georgia Diagnostics and Classifications prison in Jackson. And you walk through these really long corridors. And the security is really tight. You know, you've got the locked doors that one of them closes before the one in front of you opens, and you get a strict search, and you leave your passport at the door, and all you're allowed to take in is a bag of quarters, which you buy, which you change up in the petrol station over the road, and you put it in a clear plastic bag so they can see exactly what you have. And as you walk through, there's a big sign above the door which says "Make a Difference." And then you walk down these really stark corridors and into the communal waiting room. The prison had done their best actually to deny our visit to Troy, even down to the last day when we had to get urgent forms faxed across, because this is quite a high-profile visit. Eventually we got permission to see Troy, and we were all quite admittedly very nervous. You know, you're in the prison, you're on death row. Well, you weren't actually in the death row area, but you're in the communal prison area. You really don't know what to expect. And we discussed how nervous we were. And Troy had injured his knee at the time. I think he was playing basketball or something. So he came in a wheelchair into the communal visit room. And they had put us in this room, which was probably from here to say the beginning of your instrument. I was going to call it a piano, and then I realised it wasn't. And it was a really small room, and probably from the front to maybe here, and there, so maybe this big. And there are 7 of us in the room, and Troy, and they basically did their best to make the visit as difficult as possible. It's like 35 degrees outside. It's, you know, September in the south of the country, and they turned the aircon off, and we sat there for 5 hours. We were determined not to leave, but as Troy walked into the room, we all sort of went to put our hands out to shake his hand, because you don't know how to greet somebody when you've never met them before. And Troy said, "Come on, I don't shake hands, I do hugs." Gave us all a massive hug, and within 30 seconds you suddenly thought, this is really relaxed. It's a really easy environment. There was no kind of, you know, us talking to Troy or Troy talking to him. We all talked together as a group. We went and bought some disgusting food out of the machines in the prison, which Troy loved. And we sat around and we just talked for about 5 hours. And it was a weird kind of concept because, you know, you're sitting there with this man who's been in prison for the best part of his life for 20 years. And you know, you could have been sitting in a cafe with one of your oldest friends because that's how he made you feel. There was a grated door which was locked, and there was kind of a letterbox, which you can only assume was where they pass food through to the inmates. And there was a very large guard outside. But that was the only thing that made you feel that you were in a prison. If you ignored the fact, you know, I was facing Troy, so I just had a wall to look at behind him, and there are a couple of things on the sides of the room, which were instructions to prisoners or some such thing. But if you ignored that and you didn't turn around and look at the iron door outside, you really felt that you were with your old friends in a pub or a cafe. And that's really how Troy made us all feel. And I say this, that Troy is probably still is, one of the most positive people that I ever met in my life. He had no bitterness, he had no anger, he just had a focus on human rights. And I believe that Troy was an activist from behind bars. We talked at length, and Troy never failed to acknowledge the grief of the MacPhail family. Not once, in every time that I ever spoke to Troy, he always acknowledged the grief of the MacPhail family, as did the entire Davis family. And he was never caught up in any sense of bitterness. He just had hope and positivity for his fight for justice. The second time I met Troy was when I went to his evidentiary hearing in Savannah in June 2010, which, you know, the Supreme Court ordered for the first time in over 50 years. We were really lucky that day that we got a contact visit. We'd had a contact visit the previous time as well, but the prison had recently revoked contact visits. And we had a visit with 3 generations of Davis family. There was Troy's mother, Troy and all his siblings, Troy's nephew and Troy's niece. So I was with 3 generations of Davis family. And it felt so right to be there with the family, you know. There was no feeling of any imposition, that this was probably one of the first contact visits that they'd had in a long time. Yet they were so welcoming of anybody that wanted to join. And we sat around, and this was, I think, the Sunday before his evidentiary hearing. So it was 2 days before he was due to go to the evidentiary hearing, which could have ultimately changed the course of his case. But we still just chatted, and Troy made everyone feel so welcoming, and just a few anecdotes about him. It was during the World Cup in 2010. We talked about that. He said soccer. I put him right that it was football. We talked about basketball, and Troy found it absolutely hilarious that the only 2 basketball teams I knew the name of were the Knicks and the Harlem Globetrotters, and he was just in fits of laughter about it for about half an hour because he thought this was, you know, this British woman that just knew nothing about basketball. And we just sat around and joked, and that's just to give you an idea of what he was like as a person. You know, he wanted to just talk. He wanted to know about me and what I was doing and what I did in the UK and about my friends and my family. And every time we communicated by letter, he'd always mention, how are your family? You know, and remember things that you told him in a previous letter or a previous meeting. And I guess, you know, that's the image of Troy that I want people to remember. Jen Marlowe, who's a friend of mine, that if you're coming to student conference, she's coming to speak at the plenary with me about Troy. She's an activist that was with Troy the day before his execution, and she's writing a book with Martina at the moment about Troy. And Jen tells me that she used to call Troy Twinkle Toes because his little niece Kirsten, who's only about 3 or 4, is learning ballet. So she'd go and visit him in prison, and she'd be standing up on her tiptoes and, come on Uncle Troy, get up on your tiptoes, and he'd do it. And Jen called him Twinkle Toes because this is what he liked to do when his niece came to see him. And I think that's the image of Troy that I want to remember. You know, I want to think about sharing jokes with him about football, feeling like old friends chatting over a coffee. And that's what I'll choose to remember. I'll never ever think of Troy strapped to a gurney and being executed. That's not an image that I want to think of him. And none of you should have that image of him either. Really do hold on to positive images of Troy. And I think about what made Troy strong. And I know that what made him strong was the amazing love of his family, the closeness of the family, and their unwavering support. You know, before the report from Amnesty was issued in 2007, the Davis family had spent since 1991 knocking on doors and begging people to listen to the story of their brother, their son. And all of a sudden, when Amnesty got involved, you know, we saw this support start. And I remember, you know, talking to people 2008, 2007, 2008, going to meetings and just talking to 1, 2, 3, 4 people about Troy, and gradually the campaign grew. And I fully believe that if Amnesty hadn't got involved, Troy would have been executed in 2007 at his first execution date. So I think we have to remember that, you know, our movement kept Troy alive for an extra 4 years. And that's a really somber thought, but that is the reality. We kept him alive. The legal system didn't keep him alive. Activism kept him alive. And Troy knew the support that he had. He was fully aware of how many people around the world were campaigning for him. And the last time I visited him, he said to me that one of the things that gave him the most hope was that students and young people were taking action on the death penalty as a result of his case. He wanted me to tell everyone that students and young people learning about the injustices of the death penalty as a result of his case was something that he took huge, huge positivity from. The day before Troy was executed, he met with, obviously, he had a lot of time with his family, he met with friends, he gave people tasks that he wanted them to do, and one of the tasks that he's given us as his friends and supporters is to continue working against the death penalty. His sister Kim has said that he was prayerful and at peace before he was executed. And in every single thing that I've heard from the Davis family,